A few months ago, I stopped at a rest area in Arizona around 3 in the morning. One truck was sitting under a lamp with the engine running. No headlights, no interior lights. But the steering wheel inside the cab was moving, and there was no one in the driver's seat. Tonight I'm sharing 7 trucker horror stories from the road. Before we start, comment what time it is where you're watching from, and where you're watching from. Let's begin. My shift ended a little after 1:30 in the morning. That was normal for me. I worked nights at a warehouse outside Kingman, Arizona. By the time I clocked out, most of the highway traffic had already disappeared. The drive home usually felt like traveling through a completely different world. Quiet roads, dark desert, just the sound of the engine and whatever late-night radio show happened to be on. That night felt the same at first. I pulled onto Interstate 40 and settled into the right lane. The sky above the desert was completely black, the kind of darkness you only get when there are no cities nearby. The headlights stretched out in front of my car, like 2 narrow tunnels of light cutting through empty space. My gas tank was about half full, enough to get home without stopping. The radio was playing some overnight talk show about strange roadside stories. I remember the host laughing about people claiming they saw things on lonely highways. I didn't pay much attention to it. Most nights, the road was empty, except for the occasional semi-truck. A few minutes after merging onto the highway, I noticed one in my rearview mirror. At first, it was just a pair of bright headlights far behind me. Tall lights, higher than a normal car. The shape of the truck slowly formed in the darkness as it got closer. A long semi, nothing unusual. Trucks drove that highway all the time. I kept my speed steady at around 70 miles per hour and focused on the road ahead. The truck stayed behind me at a comfortable distance, not tailgating, not trying to pass, just there. 10 minutes went by. The road stayed empty in front of me. Desert on both sides, no exits for miles. I glanced in the mirror again. The truck was still there. Same distance. Its orange marker lights lined the top of the cab like a row of tiny stars. The grille looked huge in the darkness, like a wall of metal moving through the night. I didn't think much of it. On long highways like that, it's common for 2 vehicles to travel together for a while. Sometimes people just happen to be going the same direction for miles. Still, something about it caught my attention. Not because the truck was too close, but because it never seemed to change distance. Another 10 minutes passed. The truck stayed exactly where it was, not gaining, not falling back, just sitting there behind me like it had locked itself to my speed. I tapped the accelerator slightly, pushing my car up to 75. A few seconds later, I checked the mirror again. The truck was still there. Same distance. Its headlights filled the mirror just enough that I could see the outline of the cab clearly now. That was when I started noticing the small details. The truck never drifted in its lane, never moved to pass, never slowed. Just stayed behind me like it had decided that my car was the exact speed it wanted to travel. I told myself it was nothing. Just a truck driver cruising through the desert like everyone else. But after another 15 minutes of empty highway, I realized something. That truck had been behind me for almost 40 miles, and it still hadn't tried to pass. For the first 40 miles, I kept telling myself it was nothing. Just another truck driver heading the same direction. Highways work like that sometimes. 2 vehicles end up moving together for a long stretch of road, same speed, same destination, no big deal. Still, something about the way that truck stayed behind me started to feel intentional. I checked the mirror again. The headlights were still there. Same distance, like they were glued to the back of my car. I decided to test something. I moved into the left lane. The highway was empty, no other cars, just the truck behind me. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the truck moved too. It drifted slowly into the left lane, right behind me. I watched it in the mirror. That alone wasn't proof of anything. Maybe the driver just decided to change lanes at the same time. So I moved back to the right lane. A few seconds later, the truck moved back too. I felt the first small knot of tension in my stomach. Still, I told myself the same thing. Coincidence. The road ahead stayed dark and empty. The desert stretched out on both sides like a black ocean. I glanced down at the dashboard clock. 2:12 a.m. I had been driving with that truck behind me for almost an hour now. The radio host was still talking about strange highway encounters. I turned the volume down until it was barely audible. The truck stayed there, watching, following, matching every mile I drove. I pressed the accelerator again. 75. Then 80. The engine hummed louder as my car picked up speed. In the mirror, the headlights grew brighter. The truck sped up too. Same distance. Still behind me. Now the knot in my stomach tightened a little more. I slowed back down to 70. The truck slowed too. Perfectly. Like we were connected somehow. I leaned forward slightly in my seat, staring harder at the mirror. The cab of the truck was clearer now. Tall. Dark. Its grille looked massive in the headlights, but I still couldn't see the driver. Just darkness behind the windshield. I looked ahead again. The next highway exit sign appeared in the distance. 20 miles to the next town. I didn't want to wait that long, so I decided to run another test. If the truck was really just going the same direction, this would prove it. I flipped on my turn signal. The empty highway echoed with the faint clicking sound inside my car. The exit ramp approached. At the last moment, I steered right and left the interstate. The car rolled down the long, curved ramp toward a quiet 2-lane road that ran through the desert. For a few seconds, I felt relief. The truck was probably going to stay on the highway. Most truck drivers wouldn't bother leaving the interstate unless they had to. I checked the mirror. The ramp behind me was empty. I let out a slow breath. Maybe I had been overthinking everything. Maybe the driver really had just been going the same direction the whole time. Then I reached the bottom of the ramp, and in my rearview mirror, I saw 2 headlights appear at the top of the exit. The truck had taken the ramp too. Seeing those headlights appear at the top of the exit ramp made my chest tighten instantly. For a second, I just stared at the mirror. Maybe the truck driver simply needed the same exit. Maybe there was a gas station nearby. Maybe this road connected to another highway. There were still a lot of explanations that didn't involve me being followed, but the timing felt too perfect. The truck rolled slowly down the ramp behind me. Its headlights washed over the asphalt like 2 bright spotlights. I pressed the accelerator a little harder and turned onto the empty 2-lane road. The desert out there looked even darker than the highway. No streetlights, no buildings, just a thin ribbon of pavement cutting through miles of black desert. I checked the mirror again. The truck turned onto the same road, still behind me, still the exact same distance. The knot in my stomach tightened again. I drove for another mile, then another. The road stayed empty in front of me. No houses, no gas stations, nothing, just desert. Behind me, the truck followed quietly. I could hear the faint roar of its engine, even through the closed windows of my car, a low diesel rumble rolling across the empty road. I tried another test. I slowed down suddenly. From 70 to 50. The truck slowed down too. Perfectly. Still the same distance. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Now my brain was running through possibilities faster than I could control. Maybe the driver was messing with me. Maybe he thought it was funny. Or maybe he was just another night driver, trying to stay behind someone for safety. But none of those explanations explained one thing: why he never passed, even on an empty road. I pressed the accelerator again. 60. 70. The truck sped up. Still there. Still behind me. That was when I noticed something else. The truck never got closer. Not even when I slowed down. Not even when I sped up. It stayed exactly the same distance away. Like the driver had decided that was the only position he wanted. Behind me, watching. The road curved gently through the desert. My headlights illuminated the empty pavement ahead. Then suddenly something appeared in the distance. A faint glow. Lights. Probably a gas station or a small roadside stop. Relief washed through me. If there were people there, I could pull in. Bright lights. Security cameras. Other drivers. The kind of place where someone following you would think twice. I kept driving toward the lights. In the mirror, the truck followed. But now I could see more details of it. The tall cab, the long trailer, and the dark windshield where I still couldn't see the driver. I glanced ahead again. The lights were closer now. Definitely a gas station. A small one, but open. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the desert night. I flipped on my turn signal and slowed down. The gas station parking lot came into view. I turned into it quickly. For a second, I held my breath, waiting to see if the truck would follow. But the truck didn't turn. It drove straight past the entrance, its headlights sweeping across the front of the station for just a moment. Then it disappeared down the road. I exhaled slowly. Maybe that was it. Maybe the driver really had just been heading the same way the whole time. I parked under the bright lights near the front door of the gas station. Inside the store, a clerk stood behind the counter, watching a small television. When I stepped inside, he looked up briefly. "Late drive?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler. For the first time in almost an hour, I felt my shoulders relax. But when I stepped back outside with the bottle in my hand, I noticed something that made the tension rush back instantly. Far down the road, in the darkness beyond the gas station lights, 2 headlights had stopped, and they were facing directly toward the station. For a few seconds, I just stood there in the gas station parking lot, holding the bottle of water, staring into the darkness. The headlights were still there, far down the road, not moving, just sitting in the black desert beyond the edge of the gas station lights, watching. At least that was how it felt. I told myself there were still reasonable explanations. Maybe the truck driver had pulled over. Maybe he was checking directions. Maybe he was just taking a break. But something about the way the headlights were positioned made my stomach twist. They weren't angled toward the road. They were pointed directly at the gas station. Directly at me. I forced myself to walk casually back toward my car. No sudden movements. No panic. Just another tired traveler, stopping for gas. That was the image I wanted anyone watching to see. I opened the door and sat down. Before starting the engine, I checked the mirror again. The headlights hadn't moved. Still there, still watching. I leaned forward and glanced toward the store window. The clerk inside was back to watching his small television. He hadn't noticed anything. Why would he? To him, this was probably just another quiet night in the middle of nowhere. But to me, it suddenly felt like the loneliest place in the world. I started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered on. For a moment, I considered staying there, waiting until another car arrived. But the highway was still a long drive away, and the thought of sitting in that parking lot while those headlights stared at me from the darkness made my skin crawl. So I did the only thing that made sense. I pulled out of the gas station, back onto the road. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The truck stayed in the distance. Then, slowly, those headlights moved. The truck rolled forward and turned onto the road behind me again. My heart dropped. This time I didn't bother pretending it was coincidence. I pressed the accelerator harder. The road ahead stretched empty through the desert. No lights, no houses, nothing. Just darkness. In the mirror, the truck followed. The distance between us stayed the same. Again. Exactly the same. That was when another thought entered my mind. One that made my chest feel tight. If the driver had wanted to pass me, he would have done it already. If he had wanted to leave, he could have stayed at the gas station. But instead, he had waited. Waited until I left. Then followed again. That meant only one thing. He wasn't following the road. He was following me. I pushed the car faster. 70, 80. The truck stayed behind me. Still the same distance. Still matching my speed. The engine of my car whined louder as I pushed it harder than I normally would on a road like this. My eyes kept jumping between the road ahead and the mirror. And that was when I noticed something that made the entire situation feel even worse. The truck's headlights suddenly went dark. Not dim. Not turning away. They shut off completely. 1 second they were there. The next second, nothing. Just darkness behind me. But I could still hear the truck. That deep diesel rumble rolling through the desert night. And somehow, that sound felt even closer than before. When the truck's headlights went dark, every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. The road behind me had turned into a wall of black, but the engine was still there, that low diesel rumble. And it sounded closer, much closer. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I pressed the accelerator harder. 80, 85. The car started to vibrate slightly from the speed. The road wasn't meant for driving this fast, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting back to the highway, getting somewhere with people, lights, traffic, anything. Behind me, the truck stayed invisible. No headlights, no outline, Just that engine. Still following. Still there. For a few seconds, I considered slamming the brakes. If the driver couldn't see me, maybe he would pass. But another thought hit me immediately. What if he could see me? What if the headlights were off on purpose? My chest felt tight. My brain was running through every possible outcome. None of them were good. The road curved gently through the desert again, and then something appeared ahead. Another faint glow. This time it wasn't a gas station. It was the highway. The overhead lights of the on-ramp were visible in the distance. Relief rushed through me so quickly, it almost made me dizzy. I pushed the car faster. The engine whined as I approached the ramp. I merged onto the highway without slowing down. The empty lanes stretched out ahead of me. For the first time in almost an hour, I saw other headlights. Cars in the distance, moving, alive. I glanced into the mirror. Still darkness. No headlights. But I could still hear the truck, somewhere behind me. Then suddenly, two bright headlights exploded to life, right behind my car. So close that the entire back window filled with white light. I flinched. My heart slammed against my ribs. The truck had been right behind me the whole time. Closer than I thought. Much closer. Now that we were back on the highway, the truck finally moved. It shifted lanes, slowly pulling up beside me. The cab of the truck towered over my car. For a second, I was too afraid to look, but curiosity forced me to glance over. The driver sat high in the seat, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting near the open window. He didn't look angry. He didn't look aggressive. In fact, he looked calm, almost bored. He turned his head slightly toward me, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. Then, he lifted one hand and made a simple gesture. He pointed behind my car, twice. Then, he accelerated. The truck roared forward and disappeared down the highway, leaving me alone again, confused, shaking. For a few seconds, I just kept driving, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, slowly, a horrible realization crept into my mind. I looked in the mirror again, at the back seat of my car, at the dark space behind my head, and for the first time that night, I understood why the truck had stayed behind me the entire drive. Not to chase, not to threaten me, but to watch something in the back seat of my car. Something I hadn't checked once during the entire drive. I didn't stop the car. I didn't turn around. I just kept driving. Faster and faster down the highway, because whatever the truck driver thought he saw back there, I wasn't sure I wanted to see it too. I stopped at that truck stop a little after 1:30 in the morning. It was one of those smaller stops along Interstate 40 in western Oklahoma. Not a big chain place, just a low building with a diner, a couple fuel pumps, and a parking lot big enough for maybe 20 rigs if everyone parked carefully. By the time I pulled in, most of the trucks were already shut down for the night. A few engines idled here and there, the soft diesel rumble that fills every truck stop after midnight. I backed into an open spot near the middle of the lot and set the brakes. The highway noise faded behind me. The sky was clear. Cold stars stretched over the flat Oklahoma plains. Out here, the darkness feels deeper than it does near cities. I shut the engine off and sat there for a minute, letting the silence settle inside the cab. That's when I noticed the other truck. It was parked near the far edge of the lot, almost under one of the tall yellow lights. A gray semi, no trailer attached. The engine was running. You could tell from the faint vibration in the air and the steady plume of exhaust drifting upward in the cold night. That wasn't unusual by itself. Plenty of drivers leave their engines idling overnight. But something about it caught my attention. The cabin light was on, bright enough that I could see the inside of the cab from where I was parked. Most drivers turn that light off once they settle in for the night, but this one stayed on. The truck sat there humming quietly beneath the lamp, engine idling, interior glowing. I figured the driver was probably awake, maybe finishing paperwork, maybe eating something, maybe talking on the phone with someone back home. I grabbed my jacket and climbed down from the cab. Cold air hit my face immediately. Oklahoma nights can drop fast once the sun disappears. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the building. As I passed between the rows of trucks, I glanced again toward the gray one. From that angle, I could see more clearly into the windshield, the steering wheel, the dashboard. the passenger seat. But I didn't see a driver. I slowed down a little, squinting through the light. Maybe he was leaning back in the sleeper, behind the seats. Maybe the angle just hid him from view. Still, something about it felt slightly off. The interior light was bright enough that if someone was sitting in the driver's seat, I should have seen at least a shadow. Instead, the seat looked empty. I told myself I was probably just looking from the wrong angle. Drivers move around in their cabs all the time. So I kept walking. Inside the building, the diner was still open. A tired waitress poured coffee for 2 drivers sitting at the counter. I grabbed a sandwich, stretched my legs for a few minutes, then headed back outside. Maybe 20 minutes had passed. When I stepped back into the parking lot, the first thing I did was look toward that gray truck again. It was still there. Still idling. Still glowing from the cabin light. Nothing had changed. The same quiet engine rumble. The same empty-looking driver's seat. I stood there for a moment longer than I meant to, watching, waiting to see if someone would move inside the cab. But no one did. Eventually, that climbed back into my own truck and shut the door. The lot settled into that late-night stillness again. Engines humming. Wind moving softly across the asphalt. I pulled the curtain across the windshield and stretched out in the bunk. But before I turned the light off, I glanced one more time through the small gap in the curtain. The gray truck was still sitting beneath the lamp, engine running, cabin light on, and the driver's seat still looked completely empty. The truck was still there when I woke up. At first, I didn't even remember noticing it the night before. My brain was still half asleep, the way it gets after a few hours in the bunk with diesel engines humming around you. But then I saw the yellow glow through the small gap in the curtain, the cabin light, still on. I pushed the curtain aside and looked out through the windshield. Morning hadn't arrived yet. The sky was still dark blue, the kind of color that sits between night and sunrise. The parking lot looked almost the same as it had hours earlier. Rows of trucks sitting quietly, a few engines still idling, and that same gray semi parked under the tall lamp at the edge of the lot. Engines still running, cabin light still on. For a second, I thought maybe I had only slept 20 minutes. But when I checked the clock on the dash, it read 3:07 a.m. I had been asleep nearly 2 hours. I rubbed my eyes and leaned forward. From this distance, I could still see inside the cab. The steering wheel. The passenger seat. The dashboard lights glowing faintly beneath the interior lamp. But the driver's seat still looked empty. I stayed there watching it for a while. Sometimes when a driver is sitting very still, especially if they're leaned back into the sleeper, you can miss them from certain angles. But the longer I stared, the more it felt like there really wasn't anyone in that seat. Then the light went out. The cabin light shut off suddenly. The truck was still running, but now the interior went dark. A few seconds later, it came back on. Bright again, then off, then on. I frowned. The pattern repeated every 20 or 30 seconds. Light on, light off, light on again. Like someone inside the cab was opening the door slightly, then closing it again. Except, I never saw the door move, and I never saw anyone step down from the truck. The lot was quiet enough that I would have heard it if someone climbed out. The metal steps, the door hinge, the thud of boots hitting gravel. But there was nothing, just the low diesel hum and the faint wind moving across the asphalt. I leaned farther forward, pressing my shoulder against the glass to get a clearer angle. The lamp above the gray truck flickered once, then steadied. The cabin light came on again. For a moment I thought I saw movement inside, a shadow crossing the steering wheel. I held my breath. But the shadow didn't move again. The seat stayed empty. The wheel stayed still. Then the light clicked off again. I glanced around the rest of the parking lot. A few other drivers were awake now. One man walked toward the bathrooms, rubbing his hands together against the cold. Another truck started its engine near the fuel pumps. Normal activity, normal sounds. Nothing about the rest of the place seemed strange, except that one truck. The cabin light flickered on again. And this time, something inside the cab moved. The steering wheel shifted slightly to the left, just a few inches, then slowly back to center. My chest tightened, because I could see the entire driver's seat clearly, and there were still no hands on the wheel. The steering wheel stayed still after that. For a few seconds, nothing moved inside the cab. The cabin light remained on, bright and flat, making every surface inside the truck look oddly exposed. The empty seat, the dashboard, the sleeper curtain half pulled across the back wall. I kept staring at it, trying to convince myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe the truck had some kind of automatic steering adjustment. Maybe the suspension shifted slightly when the engine vibrated. Maybe the wheel just settled from pressure in the system. But the longer I watched, the less those explanations felt right. The wheel had turned slowly, deliberately, like someone testing it. I pulled the curtain fully open and swung my legs out of the bunk. The vinyl seat was cold when I sat down. Outside, the parking lot was beginning to change. A few trucks were starting their morning routes. Headlights blinked on one by one across the lot. The gray truck stayed exactly where it was, still idling, still under the lamp, still with the interior light on, and still with no one visible inside. I grabbed my jacket again. Part of me told me to ignore it. Drivers see weird things at night when they're tired. Long hours on the road do strange things to your perception. But another part of me kept replaying the moment the wheel moved. That part wanted a clear answer. I climbed down from the cab and stepped onto the gravel. The cold air had that dry, dusty smell you get out in western Oklahoma before sunrise. The wind was light, but steady. As I walked between the trucks, the gray semi grew larger in front of me. Up close, I could see more details. It was an older Freightliner. Paint faded along the edges of the hood. No company logos. No DOT numbers on the door. Just a blank gray cab with the engine quietly rumbling. The interior light was still glowing through the windshield. I slowed my steps as I got closer. From here I should definitely be able to see the driver, if there was one. But the seat still looked empty. The steering wheel sat perfectly centered again. The dashboard lights glowed faintly beneath the cabin lamp. I stopped about 20 feet away. No movement. No shadow. No sign that anyone was inside. The engine hummed steadily. A thin stream of exhaust drifted upward behind the cab. I glanced around the rest of the lot again. A driver walked out of the diner carrying a coffee. Another truck pulled slowly toward the exit. Life going on like normal. No one else seemed to care about the gray truck. Maybe they hadn't noticed it. Or maybe they had, and just decided not to look too closely. I stepped closer, 10 feet now. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots. Still nothing moved inside the cab. Then something caught my eye. On the passenger seat, a phone. The screen was lit. It faced the windshield, and the camera was pointed directly toward me. The phone screen glowed faintly in the passenger seat. From where I stood, I could see the camera lens aimed straight toward the windshield, toward me. At first I assumed someone must have left it there while stepping inside the diner. That would make sense. Drivers forget things all the time. But the more I looked, the stranger it felt. The phone wasn't just lying there. It was propped up carefully against a small notepad on the dashboard, positioned, like someone had intentionally aimed the camera outward. The screen brightness dimmed for a moment, then brightened again, as if detecting motion. Detecting me. A small red dot appeared in the corner of the display. Recording. I felt a slow tightening in my stomach. Why would someone leave a phone recording inside an empty truck? I stepped a little closer to the windshield, squinting through the glass. The screen showed the camera feed. The parking lot, the trucks, and me standing there looking in. My own silhouette filled the center of the frame. I instinctively stepped back. The image on the phone adjusted with the movement. Still recording. The engine continued to idle quietly, steady and patient, like the truck had been waiting there all night. I looked toward the diner again. The waitress inside was wiping the counter. 2 drivers sat talking near the window. Neither of them seemed to be paying attention to the lot. I turned back toward the gray truck. Something else inside the cab caught my eye now that I was closer. A jacket hung behind the driver's seat. Heavy denim. The kind a lot of long-haul drivers wear. But the way it hung looked wrong. It wasn't draped over the seat. It was suspended slightly behind it, like it had been lifted halfway off the hook and then frozen there. I frowned, trying to figure out what I was seeing. Then the cabin light flickered. Once. Twice. The phone screen brightened again. The red recording dot blinked. And slowly, very slowly, the driver's seat slid backward. Not suddenly. Not violently. Just a slow, smooth motion along the rails. Like someone had pushed the lever beneath the seat and leaned their weight back. Except there was still no one sitting in it. The seat stopped moving. For a moment, everything went still again. The phone kept recording. The engine kept idling. Then, the steering wheel turned slightly to the right, just a few inches. And this time, I could see it clearly. The movement came from the inside, from the space where a driver should have been sitting. My body reacted before my brain caught up. I stepped back another few feet. The gravel shifted under my boots. The phone screen inside the truck adjusted again, tracking the movement outside, tracking me. And that's when the driver's door handle moved. Not opening, just pressing down slightly, like someone inside the cab was testing it, slowly, carefully, as if they were deciding whether to come out. The door handle stopped moving. For a few seconds, everything went quiet again. The engine idled. The phone kept recording. The interior light hummed faintly above the empty seat. I stood there frozen in the gravel, staring at the cab. My brain was still trying to find a reasonable explanation for what I had just seen. Maybe someone was lying down behind the seat and reaching forward. Maybe the angle hid them. But I knew that wasn't true. I had been looking directly through the windshield the whole time. There was no one there. The door handle lifted slowly back into its normal position. Then the driver's door creaked open, just a few inches. Cold air slipped into the cab. The interior light flickered again. I took another step back. The door opened a little wider. The metal hinges made a slow, grinding sound. Still, no one appeared in the doorway. The step below the cab remained empty. I could see the entire interior from where I stood. Empty driver's seat. Empty sleeper behind it. Phone still recording from the passenger side. But the door was definitely opening. Another inch. Then another. Until it was halfway open. The engine continued its steady low rumble. Exhaust drifted upward behind the truck. Across the lot, someone started another rig. The loud diesel roar briefly filled the air. But my attention stayed locked on the gray truck, because the seat moved again. Slowly sliding forward this time, like someone shifting their weight to stand up. The steering wheel twitched slightly, then stopped. The door opened fully, wide enough that anyone inside could step down onto the metal step. I waited. Nothing came out. No boots, no driver, no shadow crossing the doorway. Just the empty cab glowing under the light. I felt a deep, instinctive sense that I shouldn't be standing there anymore. Whatever was happening inside that truck, it wasn't meant to be watched. I turned and walked back toward my own rig, not running, just walking quickly, trying not to look back. The gravel crunched loudly under each step. When I reached my truck, I climbed up into the cab and shut the door harder than I meant to. The sound echoed across the lot. For a moment I sat there breathing heavily, staring through the windshield. The gray truck was still under the lamp. Door open. Interior, light on. Phone recording. But something had changed. The driver's seat was no longer empty. From this distance I couldn't see details. Just a shape. A dark silhouette sitting behind the wheel. Completely still. I didn't stay long enough to study it. I started my engine. Pulled out of the space. And drove straight back onto the highway. I kept driving until sunrise. About 3 hours later, I stopped at another truck stop in Texas for fuel. While I was inside paying, I overheard two drivers talking near the counter. One of them mentioned the same Oklahoma stop I had just left. He said a driver had been found there that morning, dead in his truck. Heart attack, they thought. He'd apparently died sometime the previous evening. The truck had been sitting there all night, engine idling, cabin light on, still recording on his phone. The police arrived just after sunrise, and according to the driver telling the story, the truck door was already open when they got there. Later that day, the police looked through the phone recording. The video clearly showed me standing outside the truck, but behind me, someone was already sitting in the driver's seat. And according to the coroner, the driver had been dead for hours. I had been driving for almost 7 hours when the highway started to feel unreal. Not dangerous, just empty. The kind of empty that stretches for miles in every direction. No towns, no lights, just a long strip of asphalt cutting through the desert. It was somewhere in New Mexico. I remember the time because I checked my phone when the radio signal disappeared. 2:43 a.m. The dashboard clock glowed faintly in the dark. My eyes were starting to burn from staring at the road too long. So when I saw the sign ahead, I felt instant relief. Truck stop. 1 mile. A mile later, the highway exit appeared. A single set of lights in the distance. Nothing fancy, just a small roadside truck stop sitting alone in the middle of the desert. I took the exit without thinking twice. The road curved down toward the lights. As I got closer, the place looked smaller than I expected. One diner, 2 gas pumps, and a large gravel lot beside it. The lot was filled with semi-trucks, maybe 5 or 6 of them, all parked in a straight row. At first glance, nothing about it seemed unusual. Truck stops are supposed to have trucks. But something about the scene made me slow down a little. Every single truck had its engine running. You could hear it immediately when I rolled down the window. That low diesel hum. 5 engines, all idling at once. The sound vibrated through the night air. Most truck drivers leave their engines running overnight. It keeps the cabin warm, so that part didn't bother me. What bothered me was something else. There were no drivers. Usually at places like this you see them everywhere, standing outside smoking, walking to the diner, talking near their trucks. But this place looked completely still. The trucks were there, the engines were running, but the drivers were nowhere in sight. I pulled into the gravel lot slowly. My headlights swept across the line of trucks. Big rigs, long trailers, most of them white, all parked perfectly straight, almost too straight, like someone had taken the time to line them up carefully. The gravel crunched under my tires as I parked near the diner. The moment I turned off my engine, the night became strangely quiet. The diesel hum from the trucks was still there, but without my own car running, the sound felt different, heavier, like the entire parking lot was vibrating slightly. I stepped out of the car and stretched my arms. The desert air was cold, colder than I expected, and the smell of diesel hung in the air. Not strong, just constant. The trucks sat in a row about 30 yards away. Their headlights were off, but small orange marker lights glowed along the sides of the trailers. Tiny dots of light floating in the dark. For a moment I just stood there looking at them, waiting to see if someone would appear. A driver climbing down from a cab, a door opening, anything. Nothing happened. The engines kept running. The trucks stayed still, and the lot remained completely empty. That was when I noticed something else. All the trucks were parked facing the exact same direction, toward the exit, toward the road, like they were all ready to leave at the same time. I told myself I was overthinking it. Truck drivers are organized people. Maybe they just preferred parking that way. Still, something about the scene felt planned. I walked toward the diner entrance. The neon sign above the door buzzed quietly. Inside, I could see a small counter, a few empty booths, and one person standing behind the register. The moment I pushed the door open, a small bell rang. The person behind the counter looked up. An older woman, gray hair tied back. She gave me a tired smile. "Late drive?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just needed coffee." She grabbed a mug from the rack behind her. As she poured the coffee, I glanced through the diner window. From inside, the parking lot looked even stranger. The line of trucks sat perfectly framed in the glass. Engines humming, lights glowing faintly, still no drivers. I turned back toward the counter. "Busy tonight?" I asked casually. The woman didn't answer right away. She finished pouring the coffee and slid the mug toward me. Then she glanced out the same window I had been looking through, toward the trucks. And when she spoke again, her voice was quiet. "Depends," she said, "on whether anyone else stops tonight." The coffee was strong, stronger than I expected from a place this small. I wrapped my hands around the mug and took a slow sip. Outside the diner window, the trucks were still there, engines humming, orange marker lights glowing along the trailers. The woman behind the counter leaned on the register. She watched me quietly for a moment. "You driving far tonight?" she asked. "Arizona," I said. She nodded slowly. "Long road." I glanced back toward the window again. Still no drivers. That was the part that kept bothering me. I had been inside the diner for almost 5 minutes now. At a normal truck stop, at least one driver would have come in by now. Coffee, bathroom, food, something. But the parking lot hadn't changed. Same trucks, same lights, same engines, and still no one outside. I took another sip of coffee. "You get a lot of trucks stopping here?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said. The answer sounded casual, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. I watched her for a second. Then I looked back out the window again. That was when I noticed something different. One of the trucks had moved. I blinked. At first I thought I was mistaken, but I was sure of it. The truck on the far end of the row was closer to the exit now. Not by much, maybe 10 feet, but it definitely hadn't been there before. I frowned slightly and leaned closer to the window. The engines were still humming. The lights were still glowing. But the line of trucks wasn't perfectly straight anymore. One of them had shifted forward. Did someone move that truck? I asked. The woman didn't look at the window. She wiped the counter with a small cloth. They move them sometimes, she said. Who does? She shrugged slightly. Drivers. I looked outside again. Still no drivers. The parking lot was empty. Completely empty. The hum of the diesel engines filled the silence. I suddenly realized something else. The trucks weren't just parked near the exit. They were angled slightly toward it, all of them, like they were ready to pull out quickly. The thought made the back of my neck feel cold. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Truck drivers park like that all the time. Still, something about the way the trucks were positioned made the parking lot feel less like a resting place, and more like something else, like a formation. I looked back at the woman. "You been working here long?" I asked. "Long enough." She didn't elaborate. The small television behind the counter played quietly. Some late-night rerun of a crime show. I checked my phone. Still no signal. The desert outside the diner windows looked darker than before, like the night had settled deeper while I was inside. I took the last sip of coffee and stood up. "I should get going," I said. The woman nodded. "Drive safe." As I walked toward the door, the small bell above it rang again. The cold desert air hit me as soon as I stepped outside. The diesel engines sounded louder now. The trucks sat in the same row, but the spacing between them looked different, subtly different. I walked slowly toward my car. The gravel crunched under my boots. Halfway across the lot I stopped. Between two of the trucks, something moved. Just a shadow, crossing briefly through the narrow gap between the trailers. I stared into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. The engines kept humming. The truck stayed still, and the shadow didn't appear again. For a moment I considered walking closer, just to check. But something about the narrow space between those trucks made my instincts scream at me to stay where I was. So instead I walked back to my car, quickly this time. I opened the door and got inside. Before starting the engine, I looked once more toward the line of trucks. And that was when I noticed something I was sure hadn't been there before. A seventh truck, parked at the far end of the row, engine running, lights glowing, perfectly aligned with the others. I was almost certain that truck hadn't been there when I arrived. And the strangest part was, I hadn't heard it arrive. For a few seconds, I just sat in my car, looking at the row of trucks. The engines were still running. The orange marker lights glowed faintly in the dark. And now there were 7 of them. I was almost certain there had only been 6 when I arrived. I tried to convince myself I had just miscounted earlier. Long drive, tired eyes. That kind of mistake happens all the time. Still, I kept staring at that last truck, waiting for something to happen. A door opening, a driver climbing down, anything that would make the situation feel normal again. Nothing happened. The trucks just sat there, engines humming quietly. The sound rolled across the gravel lot like a low vibration. I started my car. The headlights lit up the empty space in front of me. For a moment, I considered driving straight back to the highway, just leaving. But something about the way the trucks were positioned made me hesitate. All of them were angled toward the exit, toward the exact path my car would have to take to leave. The space between the trucks and the driveway felt narrower than before. Maybe it had always been that way. Maybe I was imagining things. Still, I shifted the car into reverse. The tires crunched over the gravel as I backed out slowly. My headlights swept across the side of the nearest trailer. White metal, dust, reflective strips glowing bright in the light. Then something moved again, between the trucks. Not clearly, just a shape, crossing through the gap between 2 trailers. I stopped the car instantly. The engine idled quietly. I leaned forward, staring through the windshield. The space between the trucks was dark, too dark. The trailers blocked most of the light from the diner behind me. I couldn't see anything now, but I knew I had seen something move. "Hello?" I called out through the open window. The word disappeared into the humming sound of the engines. No reply, no footsteps, nothing. I waited another 10 seconds, then 20. The desert wind brushed lightly across the gravel. Still nothing. I told myself it was probably just a trick of the light. Maybe the glow from the diner sign. Maybe my headlights reflecting off the trailers. I shifted the car into drive. Slowly, I pulled toward the exit of the lot. As my car moved forward, the headlights passed across the trucks one by one. First truck, second, third, fourth. Each cab looked empty. Curtains drawn inside the windows. Engines idling steadily. Then my headlights reached the sixth truck, and I saw something that made my stomach tighten. The driver's door was open, just slightly, only a few inches. I slowed down instinctively. The door moved gently in the wind, back and forth, but no one stepped out. No one climbed in. The cab remained dark. I looked toward the seventh truck at the end of the row, the one that hadn't been there before. Its engine was running too. Lights glowing along the trailer, but the windshield looked completely black, too dark to see inside. My headlights passed across it for only a second, and in that second, I thought I saw movement inside the cab, like someone leaning forward, watching the parking lot, watching my car. I pressed the accelerator, not fast, just enough to get past the trucks. The exit to the road was only 30 feet away now. The moment my car reached the edge of the lot, something strange happened. Behind me, one of the truck engines shut off. The sudden silence made me glance into the mirror. The row of trucks sat there in the dark, but now the engines were stopping, one after another, the hum fading slowly into the night. And as the sound disappeared, I realized something that made the back of my neck go cold. The trucks had been running their engines the entire time I was there, every second, like they had been waiting for something, waiting for me to leave. For a moment I thought I imagined it, the engines shutting off, one after another. But when I checked the mirror again, the parking lot behind me was completely quiet. The trucks were still there, 7 of them. Dark now, no humming engines, no movement, just a silent row of trailers sitting under the weak glow of the diner lights. I turned my eyes back to the road. The highway entrance was only a few hundred yards ahead, a straight stretch of pavement cutting through the desert. I told myself to forget about the truck stop, just drive, get back on the highway, and keep moving. The road felt longer than it should have. The tires rolled quietly over the asphalt. For a moment everything seemed normal again, until I looked in the mirror. At first I didn't notice anything strange, just darkness behind me, the diner lights getting smaller in the distance. Then something moved. A pair of headlights turned on, far behind me, at the truck stop. Then another, and another. One by one the trucks were starting their engines again. The headlights came alive in the darkness like slow waking eyes. 7 pairs of lights, all facing the road, facing the direction I was driving. My stomach tightened. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator. The highway ramp was just ahead now, but the trucks weren't staying parked. I could see them moving, slowly, pulling forward from their positions, one after another, like a line being released. I merged onto the highway. The road was still mostly empty, just a few distant headlights far ahead. I checked the mirror again. The first truck reached the road behind me, its headlights bright and steady. Then the second truck, then the third. They didn't rush, they didn't chase. They simply joined the highway, one by one, and lined up behind each other. For a moment I thought they would turn the opposite direction. Maybe they were all heading somewhere together. Maybe they were just leaving at the same time. But the line of trucks turned the same way I did, north, toward Arizona. I felt the muscles in my shoulders tighten. 7 trucks, one behind another, driving the same direction, at the same speed, and slowly, very slowly, the distance between my car and the first truck began to shrink. Not fast, not aggressively, just enough to make it clear that they were catching up. I pressed the accelerator slightly harder. My car reached 70, then 75. The truck stayed steady, the line behind me growing closer, 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 until the first truck finally settled into the lane behind me, a massive dark shape filling the mirror, and the other 6 trucks followed behind it, perfectly spaced, like they had practiced it before. I stared at the mirror for several seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. 7 trucks, driving in formation, behind a single car, my car. Then something inside the first truck flashed briefly, a small light inside the cab, just for a moment, long enough for me to notice something written across the top of the windshield, white lettering, block letters, hard to read at highway speed. But I caught two words clearly: next stop, and beneath it, a number, 8. For a few seconds, my brain struggled to process what that meant. Then, slowly, a horrible thought started forming in my head. There had been 7 trucks in that parking lot. 7, all parked in a perfect row, facing the exit. And when I arrived, my car had become the 8th vehicle there. For several seconds, I just stared at the mirror. 7 trucks, driving in a perfect line behind me. And that number painted on the windshield of the first truck, 8. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I pressed the accelerator harder, 80 miles per hour, then 85. My car began to vibrate slightly at the speed. The highway ahead stretched straight through the desert, empty, dark. But the trucks didn't fall behind. The distance stayed the same, steady, controlled, almost precise. I glanced in the mirror again. The first truck filled most of the reflection now. Its headlights were bright enough to wash the inside of my car with white light. For a moment I thought about pulling over, letting them pass. But something inside me said that would be a mistake. These trucks hadn't been in a hurry before. They had waited, at the truck stop, engines running, facing the exit, waiting for something to leave first, waiting for me. I pushed the accelerator harder, 90. The engine of my car whined loudly now. The steering wheel felt lighter. But the truck stayed behind me, still perfectly spaced, still moving like a single machine. Then I saw lights ahead, another truck stop. Far in the distance, a glowing patch of neon and parking lot lights rising out of the desert darkness. Relief washed through me immediately. If there were people there, I could pull in. Bright lights, security cameras, other drivers. The kind of place where whatever was happening behind me would stop. The truck stayed behind me as I approached the exit. My turn signal blinked. Left, left, left. I slowed slightly and turned down the ramp. For a moment, the trucks continued straight on the highway. I felt a wave of relief. Then the first truck signaled and followed me down the exit. Then the second, then the third. All 7 trucks turned off the highway, following my car again. The truck stop lights grew brighter as I approached. Rows of parked trucks filled the gravel lot. More than the last place. At least 20, maybe more. Drivers walking between them. Some smoking, some talking. Normal, busy, alive. I pulled into the lot quickly. The moment my car entered the lights, something strange happened. The 7 trucks behind me slowed. Then one by one, they stopped at the edge of the parking lot. None of them entered. They stayed there, engines running, headlights pointed toward the lot, watching. I parked near the diner entrance. My hands were shaking slightly as I stepped out of the car. A few drivers glanced at me as I walked toward the building. Normal people, normal conversations, normal noise. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. I sat at the counter and tried to calm down. The waitress noticed immediately. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just a long drive." I ordered another coffee. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the window and looked outside. The 7 trucks were still there, parked at the entrance, not moving, not entering, just sitting in the darkness beyond the lights. I watched them for almost a full minute. Then something else caught my attention. Across the lot, near the far side of the truck stop, 7 trucks were parked together, in a straight line, facing the exit, engines running, orange marker lights glowing softly in the night. For a long moment I just stared at them. Then slowly I understood something that made the coffee in my stomach feel cold. The trucks outside weren't trying to catch me. They weren't chasing me. They were just delivering something. And now, the next 7 trucks were already waiting. The highway had been empty for nearly an hour when I first saw the construction sign. Road work ahead. At first it didn't seem strange. Highways in the desert always have maintenance happening somewhere. But it was almost 2 in the morning, and the road had been completely quiet for miles. No towns, no traffic. Just the steady sound of my tires on asphalt, and the dark desert stretching out on both sides of the road. A few hundred yards later, another sign appeared in my headlights. Right lane closed, detour, right arrow. I slowed down slightly and glanced in the mirror. There were no cars behind me, none ahead either. Just the empty highway disappearing into darkness. Up ahead I could see the flashing yellow lights of a construction pickup parked on the shoulder. The lights pulsed slowly in the night air, reflecting off the road and the metal guardrail. The detour arrow pointed toward a narrow road branching off to the right. I hesitated for a second. Something about the place felt odd. Usually when construction shuts down a lane, you see cones, barriers, equipment, something. But this section of highway looked perfectly normal. No workers, no machinery, just the pickup truck and the signs. Still, the arrow was clear. So I signaled and turned onto the detour. The moment my car left the highway, the darkness seemed thicker somehow. The road was smaller than I expected. Just two narrow lanes cutting through the desert. No streetlights, no houses, not even power lines. My headlights illuminated maybe 50 yards ahead of me, and beyond that there was nothing but black desert. I checked the mirror again. The highway behind me was already gone from sight. I told myself it was fine. Detours in rural areas can be weird like that. Sometimes they send you down county roads for a few miles before reconnecting with the main highway. But after about 3 minutes of driving, I realized something. There were no other cars. Not a single pair of headlights behind me. If this was a detour for highway traffic, there should have been at least one other vehicle taking the same route. But the road stayed completely empty. The only sound was my engine and the faint rush of wind over the car. The road curved gently to the left, then straightened again. The desert on both sides looked identical. Flat land, scrub brush, occasional rock formations barely visible in the darkness. Then another sign appeared in the distance. Another construction sign. I slowed down as I approached it, but something about this one made my stomach tighten slightly. The sign wasn't facing me. It was turned sideways, almost as if it had been placed for traffic coming from the opposite direction. I drove past it slowly. Road work ahead, but the arrow beneath it pointed the other way, back toward the highway I had just left. I frowned and looked ahead at the empty road. Maybe the sign had been knocked loose by wind. Or maybe the construction crew had moved things around earlier in the day. Still, the longer I drove, the more the road felt wrong. The detour had already lasted longer than I expected. 5 minutes, then 7. Still no sign of the highway, and still no other cars. I started to wonder if I had missed another turn somewhere. That was when I saw the lights ahead, flashing yellow again. Another construction vehicle, parked sideways across part of the road. As I got closer, I could see the shape of a pickup truck sitting at an angle, forcing cars to slow down before passing. And standing beside it was a person wearing a reflective construction vest. They were standing very still in the road, waiting, watching my car approach. The man in the reflective vest didn't wave. He didn't step forward either. He just stood there in the middle of the narrow road, watching my car roll closer. For a moment I thought maybe he was going to direct traffic, but there was no traffic, just me. I slowed down until the car was barely moving. My headlights washed over him, lighting up the silver stripes on his vest. Something about him felt off. Not dangerous, exactly. Just wrong in a quiet way I couldn't explain. He didn't hold a flashlight. He didn't carry a radio. And he didn't speak. Most construction workers yell instructions or gesture clearly when cars approach. This guy just stared at the windshield. Then slowly, he raised one hand. Not a stop signal. Not a wave. Just a small motion pointing down the road behind him. Go. I hesitated. The truck parked across the road forced me to slow almost to a stop before passing. The engine idled quietly while I looked at the man again. Up close, I could see more details. His vest was dirty. Not dusty like someone working outside all day. Stained, like it had been worn for a long time without being cleaned. His hard hat looked old too. The plastic had faded to a dull gray color instead of the bright orange you usually see on construction sites. And his face. My headlights lit it clearly now. But he didn't look tired the way night workers usually do. He looked calm. Too calm. Like someone waiting for something to happen. I rolled the window down halfway. Is this the detour back to the highway? He didn't answer. For a few seconds, he just looked at me. Then he slowly nodded once. The movement felt delayed somehow, like he had decided to react only after hearing the question. I glanced past him at the road ahead. More darkness. No lights. No houses. No equipment. Just the narrow asphalt disappearing into the desert. Does it reconnect soon? I asked. This time he raised his hand again, and pointed farther down the road. Still no words. Just that same slow gesture. Go. Something in my stomach tightened. The whole situation felt wrong. But at the same time, there was no real reason to argue. Turning around here would be awkward, with the construction truck blocking half the road. And if this really was the detour, then the highway had to be somewhere ahead. So I nodded. All right. The man didn't respond. He stepped slightly to the side of the road as I drove forward. For a brief second, my headlights moved past him, and I saw something strange in the side mirror. He didn't turn to watch the car pass. Most people do that automatically. Instead, he stayed facing the same direction, looking down the road, the direction I had just come from, as if he was waiting for another car, but there had been no one behind me. The construction pickup disappeared behind a bend in the road a few seconds later. The flashing lights faded, and suddenly the night felt much darker again. I drove for another minute, then two, still nothing. No highway, no buildings, no signs. The road stretched straight ahead through the desert like a thin black ribbon. I started to feel that creeping sense of unease again, the kind that makes you check the mirrors more often than usual. I looked at the rearview mirror, empty road, but something caught my eye in the distance, far behind me. A pair of lights, headlights. I frowned slightly. There hadn't been any other cars on this detour before, but now someone was definitely driving behind me. The lights stayed far back at first, just two small points in the darkness. Then, slowly, they started getting closer. At first, I assumed it was just another driver who had taken the same detour from the highway, but after a minute, something began to bother me. The headlights weren't moving normally. They weren't bouncing slightly with the road the way most cars do. They stayed perfectly steady, and they were getting closer, faster than I expected. I checked the speedometer. I was already doing about 60. That meant the vehicle behind me had to be moving much faster than that to close the distance so quickly. The lights grew larger in the mirror, brighter, higher off the ground. Not a car, a truck, a large one, and it wasn't slowing down. The headlights behind me kept getting closer, not slowly, not like a normal vehicle catching up on a highway. It was faster than that, too fast for a narrow road like this. I glanced down at the speedometer again. 62. I pressed the gas slightly and pushed it to 65. The truck behind me didn't slow. If anything, it closed the distance even faster. The headlights were much higher than mine now, bright white beams flooding the inside of my car through the rear window. The light reflected off the mirror and forced me to tilt it downward. Definitely a semi, and it was coming up fast. I checked the road ahead. Still empty. Still that same narrow strip of asphalt cutting through the desert. No turnoffs. No shoulders wide enough to pull over safely. The truck was maybe 200 yards behind me now, then 100. The engine noise reached me a moment later. A deep, heavy rumble rolling through the night air. I told myself it was just another driver trying to get back to the highway. Maybe he knew this road better than I did. Maybe this was a shortcut truckers used all the time. But something about the way he was driving didn't make sense. A semi-truck doesn't usually rush like that on a dark two-lane road. And then I noticed something else. The truck wasn't using high beams, just two very bright, low headlights. And the outline behind them looked wrong. Most semis have a long trailer with reflective tape along the sides. Even in the dark, you can usually see the faint lines of it stretching behind the cab. But in the mirror, I couldn't see a trailer, just the cab. A truck tractor with nothing attached, which made it look even larger as it closed in behind me. The distance shrank to 50 yards, then 30. The truck slowed suddenly, not gradually. Just a quick drop in speed until it sat right behind my bumper. Too close, way too close for a vehicle that big. My heart started beating faster. I moved slightly toward the center of the lane, hoping the driver would understand I wasn't comfortable being tailgated like that. For a few seconds, the truck stayed there, huge, silent except for the low rumble of its engine. Then the headlights flicked off. The road behind me disappeared into complete darkness. For a moment, I thought maybe the driver had accidentally hit the switch, but the lights didn't come back on. The truck stayed there, following me in the dark. I couldn't see the cab anymore, just blackness behind the car. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. That was when something strange happened. The truck's headlights suddenly turned back on, but they weren't behind me anymore. They were beside me, on the left. I jerked my head toward the driver's window. There was another road, a parallel dirt track running alongside the asphalt that I hadn't noticed before. The semi was driving on it, moving almost perfectly beside my car. The cab was enormous up close, dark red paint covered with dust, the chrome grille reflecting my headlights in dull flashes. But the thing that made my stomach drop was the driver's seat. It looked empty. No movement, no silhouette behind the wheel. The truck continued rolling forward beside me, matching my speed almost perfectly. For a second, I convinced myself the driver was just leaning back or sitting lower in the seat. Then the truck's interior light flicked on. The cab filled with a dim yellow glow, and I could see it clearly. No one was inside. The headlights behind me kept getting closer, not slowly. Not like a normal vehicle catching up on a highway. It was faster than that, too fast for a narrow road like this. I glanced down at the speedometer again. 62. I pressed the gas slightly and pushed it to 65. The truck behind me didn't slow. If anything, it closed the distance even faster. The headlights were much higher than mine now, bright white beams flooding the inside of my car through the rear window. The light reflected off the mirror and forced me to tilt it downward. Definitely a semi, and it was coming up fast. I checked the road ahead. Still empty. Still that same narrow strip of asphalt cutting through the desert. No turnoffs. No shoulders wide enough to pull over safely. The truck was maybe 200 yards behind me now, then 100. The engine noise reached me a moment later. A deep, heavy rumble rolling through the night air. I told myself it was just another driver trying to get back to the highway. Maybe he knew this road better than I did. Maybe this was a shortcut truckers used all the time. But something about the way he was driving didn't make sense. A semi-truck doesn't usually rush like that on a dark two-lane road. And then I noticed something else. The truck wasn't using high beams, just two very bright, low headlights. And the outline behind them looked wrong. Most semis have a long trailer with reflective tape along the sides. Even in the dark, you can usually see the faint lines of it stretching behind the cab. But in the mirror, I couldn't see a trailer. Just the cab. A truck tractor with nothing attached, which made it look even larger as it closed in behind me. The distance shrank to 50 yards, then 30. The truck slowed suddenly, not gradually. Just a quick drop in speed until it sat right behind my bumper. Too close. Way too close for a vehicle that big. My heart started beating faster. I moved slightly toward the center of the lane, hoping the driver would understand I wasn't comfortable being tailgated like that. For a few seconds, the truck stayed there, huge, silent except for the low rumble of its engine. Then the headlights flicked off. The road behind me disappeared into complete darkness. For a moment, I thought maybe the driver had accidentally hit the switch, but the lights didn't come back on. The truck stayed there, following me in the dark. I couldn't see the cab anymore, just blackness behind the car. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. That was when something strange happened. The truck's headlights suddenly turned back on, but they weren't behind me anymore. They were beside me, on the left. I jerked my head toward the driver's window. There was another road, a parallel dirt track running alongside the asphalt that I hadn't noticed before. The semi was driving on it, moving almost perfectly beside my car. The cab was enormous up close, dark red paint covered with dust, the chrome grille reflecting my headlights in dull flashes. But the thing that made my stomach drop was the driver's seat. It looked empty. No movement, no silhouette behind the wheel. The truck continued rolling forward beside me, matching my speed almost perfectly. For a second, I convinced myself the driver was just leaning back or sitting lower in the seat. Then the truck's interior light flicked on. The cab filled with a dim yellow glow, and I could see it clearly. No one was inside. For a few seconds, I just sat there, frozen. The truck in front of me idled quietly in the middle of the road. Its engine produced a deep vibration that I could feel through the steering wheel. The driver's door was still hanging open slightly. No movement inside. Behind me, the three trucks kept getting closer. Their headlights grew larger in the mirror. 3 pairs of white lights rolling steadily down the detour road. Not rushing, not honking, just approaching. Slowly, deliberately. My first instinct was to reverse, but the trucks behind me were already too close for that to work. Even if I backed up fast, there was no way my car could outrun 3 semis on a straight road. and the dirt shoulder on either side of the asphalt looked soft and uneven. If I slid off the pavement at the wrong angle, I'd lose control immediately. The truck in front of me suddenly revved its engine. The sound exploded through the quiet desert. The entire cab shook slightly, then rolled forward a few feet, just enough to clear half the lane. It didn't fully move aside, just enough space for a small vehicle to squeeze past, if the driver was willing to take the risk. The open door swayed slightly as the truck moved. Still, no one inside. I stared at the gap. My headlights illuminated the narrow space between the truck's massive front bumper and the edge of the road. It was barely wide enough, but it might work. Behind me, the three trucks continued closing the distance. Their headlights now filled the rearview mirror, and that was when something strange happened. One of them flashed its lights. Not a quick flicker, a slow, deliberate pulse. Then another truck behind it did the same. Then the third. 3 trucks, flashing their lights one after another, like a signal or a countdown. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Suddenly, the detour signs, the silent construction worker, the empty truck in front of me, all started to feel like pieces of the same thing. Like I had been guided here, led off the highway, placed on this road. My foot moved before I had fully decided what to do. I slammed the gas. The engine roared, and the car shot forward. I aimed for the gap beside the truck's bumper. For a split second, I thought I was going to hit it. The space was tighter than I expected. The right side of my car scraped the gravel shoulder as I forced it through the opening. The side mirror clipped something metal with a loud crack. Then suddenly, the road ahead opened up again. Empty asphalt. Dark desert. I didn't slow down. I pushed the car as fast as it would go. 80. 90. The engine screamed as the road rushed past beneath the headlights. In the mirror, I saw the trucks behind me reach the spot where the cab had been blocking the road. None of them chased me. They just slowed. Then one by one, they turned. Not back toward the highway, toward the dirt road beside the pavement, the same parallel track the first truck had used. Within seconds, all 4 trucks were moving together across the desert, their headlights forming a slow procession in the distance, heading somewhere deeper into the darkness. I drove another 15 minutes before the road finally curved upward and reconnected with the highway. The same highway I had left earlier. There were normal cars there, normal traffic, streetlights, gas stations. Everything looked completely ordinary again. I pulled into the first rest stop I saw and parked. My hands were still shaking. I sat there for a long time trying to convince myself the whole thing had just been some strange coincidence, some weird construction detour, some truck drivers messing around. But when I finally stepped out of the car, I noticed something that made the back of my neck tighten. The scrape along the passenger side of the car was deep. Long streaks of red paint were smeared across the metal, the same dusty red color as the truck cab that had blocked the road. But mixed in with the paint were several thin parallel scratches, perfectly straight, too narrow to be from metal, almost like something with claws had dragged along the side of the car while I squeezed past the truck. And the strange part was, those scratches didn't start near the bumper. They started much higher up, right beside the passenger window. The first time I noticed the white truck, it didn't seem important. It was just another semi sitting at the edge of the truck stop parking lot. I had pulled into a Flying J somewhere in western Kansas a little after midnight. It had been a long stretch of highway, and I needed diesel and coffee before pushing through the rest of the night. The place was quiet. A few trucks were parked in the overnight lanes. The fuel island lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting that pale yellow glow over the pavement and rows of trailers. Nothing unusual. Just another stop on a long haul. I filled the tanks, cleaned the windshield, and went inside for coffee. When I came back out, that's when I noticed the white truck again. It was parked farther out than most drivers would choose. Not near the fuel pumps, not in the sleeping lanes. Just sitting alone at the far edge of the lot. No trailer attached. The cab was completely white. No company logo, no decals. Not even the usual DOT numbers on the door that every truck in the country is supposed to have. Just blank paint. The engine wasn't running. No interior light, and the windshield looked so dark that I couldn't see if anyone was sitting inside. I stood there for a moment, sipping the coffee, mostly just stretching my legs before getting back in the cab. Then I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The diesel rumbled to life beneath me. As I pulled away from the fuel island, I glanced once more toward the empty white truck. It hadn't moved. Still sitting there at the edge of the lot. Still dark. Still silent. I drove out of the truck stop and merged back onto the interstate. The highway was almost empty at that hour. A few headlights far ahead. Occasional taillights disappearing over the hills. But mostly, it was just long stretches of dark road and the steady hum of tires on asphalt. For the first 40 minutes, nothing happened. Just the usual rhythm of night driving. The dashboard lights glowing softly. The radio murmuring low talk shows to keep me awake. Mile markers passing by in the darkness. Then I looked in the mirror and saw the white truck. At first, I didn't even realize it was the same one. Just another semi behind me. But something about it caught my attention. The headlights were spaced wider than most trucks, and the cab looked unusually bright in the darkness. Plain white. No markings. The same blank cab I had seen parked at the truck stop. I frowned slightly and looked again. It was several hundred yards behind me, keeping a steady distance. That by itself didn't mean anything. Trucks follow each other all the time on long night drives. Sometimes it's actually comforting to know someone else is out there on the same stretch of road. Still, something about it bothered me, mostly because I had never seen it leave the truck stop. I tried to remember. Had it been running when I left? Had I simply missed it pulling out behind me? Maybe the driver had been inside the store when I walked past. That was the most reasonable explanation. So I shrugged it off and kept driving. The interstate rolled straight through the dark farmland. Another 20 minutes passed. The truck stayed behind me. Same distance. Same steady speed. Eventually I started getting tired again. Coffee helped, but only so much. So when I saw the sign for a rest area coming up, I decided to pull in for a quick stop. Just 5 minutes to stretch my legs. Maybe splash some water on my face. I took the exit ramp and rolled slowly into the rest area. The parking lot was mostly empty. 2 pickup trucks near the bathrooms. 1 refrigerated trailer idling farther down the row. I parked near the lights and shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt almost strange after hours of road noise. I stepped down from the cab and stretched my back. The night air was cool. Quiet. For a few seconds, I just stood there, breathing in the fresh air and looking out over the dark fields beyond the highway. Then headlights swept across the lot behind me. I turned and watched the white truck roll slowly into the rest area. It drove past the entrance, past the bathroom building, past the first row of parking spaces. Then it stopped, right at the far end of the lot, exactly the same way it had been parked earlier at the truck stop, alone. Away from the lights. The engine shut off. The cab went dark. I stared at it for a moment. Something about the way it had chosen the same kind of spot again made my stomach tighten slightly. Maybe the driver just liked quiet parking areas. Some drivers are like that. But as I walked toward the restroom building, one thought kept coming back to me. I had left the truck stop almost an hour ago, and I never once saw that white truck pass me on the highway. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I meant to, just looking at the truck. It sat at the far end of the lot, exactly the way it had been parked at the truck stop earlier, away from the lights, away from the other vehicles. Completely dark, no engine noise, no interior light, nothing. I finally shook it off and walked toward the restroom building. Rest areas at night always have a strange kind of silence. The fluorescent lights hum above the concrete. Insects bounce lazily against the glass, and the highway noise drifts in from somewhere far away. Inside, the place was empty. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection for a second. Long night. Still a few hundred miles left before my next real stop. When I stepped back outside, the air felt colder. The parking lot hadn't changed much. Two pickups still parked near the building, the refrigerated trailer still idling down the row, and the white truck still sitting alone at the far edge. But something had changed. The driver's door was open, not wide, just a few inches, like someone had stepped out and forgotten to close it. I stood there for a moment, watching it, waiting to see if someone would appear. No one did. No footsteps, no movement, just the door sitting slightly open, rocking very gently in the wind. That uneasy feeling came back again. Not fear exactly, just the sense that something didn't line up right. If the driver had stepped out, where had he gone? The rest area wasn't that big. He should have walked past me on the way to the building, unless he was already inside while I was in there. But I hadn't heard the door open, and I hadn't seen anyone. I told myself it didn't matter. Truck stops and rest areas are full of weird little coincidences like that. Drivers keep odd schedules. People come and go at strange hours. Still, as I walked back toward my truck, I found myself glancing over my shoulder again. The white truck hadn't moved. The door was still open, and there was still no one in sight. I climbed into the cab and started the engine. The diesel roared to life beneath me, shaking the seat the way it always did. For a second, I sat there with the headlights on, thinking about whether I should just ignore the whole thing, or maybe drive past the truck and see if someone was actually inside. Curiosity almost won. But in the end, I decided it wasn't my business. So I pulled out of the parking space and headed back toward the exit ramp. As I drove past the far edge of the lot, the headlights swept across the white truck, and for a split second, I could see clearly through the windshield. The driver's seat was empty. No silhouette, no movement, just the steering wheel and the dark interior behind it. Then my headlights moved past, and the truck disappeared behind me again. I merged back onto the interstate and settled into the right lane. A few minutes passed, then 10. The highway stretched out ahead of me, long and quiet. I told myself the driver had probably just been in the restroom longer than I expected, or maybe sleeping in the bunk behind the seats. There were plenty of simple explanations. I almost forgot about the whole thing, until I checked the mirror again and saw the white truck pulling onto the highway behind me. The white truck merged onto the highway slowly. At first it stayed far behind me, just another pair of headlights in the darkness. I watched it in the mirror for a few seconds, then looked back at the road. There was nothing unusual about it now, just another semi traveling the same stretch of interstate. Still, the uneasy feeling hadn't completely gone away, mostly because I had seen the cab, and I was almost certain no one had been sitting in that driver's seat. I tried to tell myself I must have looked at the wrong angle, or maybe the driver had been leaning down, maybe reaching for something. That would explain it. Trucks have high dashboards and deep seats. It wouldn't be impossible to miss someone if they were bent forward. That explanation stayed in my head for about 20 minutes, long enough for the road to flatten out and the highway lights to disappear again. Then I saw the truck move, not toward me, away. It drifted into the left lane and accelerated. The engine sounded deep and heavy as it pulled forward. Soon the headlights filled the mirror, and the white cab began sliding alongside my trailer. Most truckers glance at each other when passing. Just a quick look through the window, a silent acknowledgement. I looked over. The cab rolled past slowly. The interior was dark, no glow from a phone, no dashboard light reflecting on a face. And once again, I couldn't see a driver. The steering wheel was visible. The seat behind it looked empty. The truck continued passing. For a few seconds, I tried convincing myself the driver was simply sitting lower than usual. But that explanation fell apart when the cab moved ahead of me, because the side window was perfectly clear, and there was still no one there. The truck completed the pass and moved back into the right lane, directly in front of me. Its taillights glowed faintly red in the darkness. And then something strange happened. The truck slowed down, not enough to stop traffic, just enough that I had to ease off the accelerator to keep distance. At first I thought maybe the driver had realized he was going too fast. but the truck kept slowing. 5 miles per hour, then 10. Eventually, I had to tap the brakes. Now we were both moving slower than the rest of the highway traffic. A car passed us in the left lane. Then another. The white truck stayed directly in front of me, maintaining the same reduced speed, almost like it wanted me behind it. After a minute or two, the truck drifted toward the shoulder slightly, not pulling over, just edging closer to the white line. Then its right turn signal blinked once. The signal turned off again almost immediately, but the truck didn't exit. It kept going. Another mile passed. Then the signal blinked again, once, off. It took me a moment to realize something. The signal was flashing right when we passed mile markers. The next one came up ahead. Mile 201. The truck's signal blinked, once, then went dark. I stared at the back of the truck. Another mile passed. Mile 202. The signal blinked again, one slow flash, then off. A cold feeling crept into my chest, because I suddenly remembered something from earlier. Back at the rest area, when I had seen inside the cab, there had been something sitting on the dashboard. I hadn't noticed it clearly at the time. Just a small white square of paper. But now the memory came back clearly. A piece of paper taped near the center of the windshield, with writing on it. And for some reason, I was suddenly very sure what it had said. Mile 203. The next mile marker appeared slowly in the glow of my headlights. The white truck stayed directly in front of me, still going slower than highway speed, still blocking the lane just enough that passing felt awkward. I watched the reflective sign approach on the side of the road. Mile 203. The truck's turn signal blinked, once. Then it stayed on. The truck drifted gently toward the exit ramp. I didn't follow immediately. For a moment, I stayed in the right lane, letting the truck move away toward the ramp. But something in my chest felt tight now, because I hadn't planned to stop there. At least, not originally. But earlier that night, before I ever reached the truck stop, I had checked the map on my phone. There was a rest area just past mile marker 203, a quiet one, the kind truckers often use for overnight stops. And I had considered pulling in there, not because I was tired yet, just because it was a convenient place, a good checkpoint in the middle of a long stretch. That thought had never left my head. And now the truck in front of me had just signaled for that exact exit. I stared at the ramp. The white truck disappeared down it. For a few seconds, I kept driving straight. The interstate stretched ahead, dark and empty. I told myself the whole thing was coincidence. Truckers take the same exits all the time. Mile markers mean something to every driver on the road. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. So I made a decision. I stayed on the highway. I didn't take the exit. I kept driving. 10 miles passed, then 15. The road curved gently through flat farmland under the night sky. Gradually, the tension in my shoulders began to ease. Whatever that truck was doing, it was behind me now, gone. Eventually, I saw the lights of another small truck stop ahead, a place I didn't usually stop. But I pulled in anyway, just to take a break, just to shake the strange feeling that had been building all night. The lot was half empty. I parked near the fuel island and shut the engine off. The quiet settled around the truck again. For a minute, I just sat there in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, breathing slowly. Then I noticed something through the windshield. At the far edge of the lot, parked alone near the dark fence line, was a white semi-truck. No trailer, no company logo, and no lights inside the cab. Exactly the same kind of truck I had seen twice already that night. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to convince myself it was a different vehicle, just another plain white tractor. But before I could move, the engine of the truck started. The low diesel rumble rolled across the parking lot. The headlights flicked on, and the truck began pulling slowly toward the exit. For a second, the cab turned slightly as it passed beneath one of the fuel island lights. The interior was illuminated clearly through the windshield, and just like before, The driver's seat was empty. The white truck rolled slowly toward the exit of the truck stop. Its headlights swept across the pavement, lighting up the empty fuel lanes and the dark fence at the edge of the lot. I stayed in my seat, hands still on the steering wheel, watching. The truck didn't rush. It moved with that same steady, controlled pace I had seen earlier on the highway. Almost patient, like it had already decided where it was going next. The cab passed under the last row of lights near the exit. For a moment, the windshield reflected the bright overhead lamps. And again, I could see the inside clearly. The driver's seat was empty, the steering wheel turning slightly on its own as the truck lined up with the driveway. No hands, no movement, nothing. The truck pulled out of the lot and disappeared onto the highway. The engine noise faded slowly into the distance. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the empty entrance of the truck stop, trying to convince myself that what I had seen wasn't real. Maybe there had been someone in the cab after all. Maybe the angle of the light had hidden them. Maybe I was just more tired than I thought. Eventually, I climbed down from the cab. The night air felt colder now. The lot was quiet again. One other trucker was fueling near the far pumps, but otherwise, the place looked almost abandoned. I walked inside the store and bought another coffee. The clerk barely looked up. Just another tired driver passing through. When I stepped back outside, I paused for a second beside the door, looking across the parking lot again. The white truck was gone. No sign of it anywhere. I told myself that was the end of it. Just a strange series of coincidences on a long night drive. But 2 days later, something happened that made the whole thing feel different. I was sitting in the dispatch office waiting on paperwork for my next load, when I overheard two drivers talking. They were discussing something that had happened at a rest area off Interstate 70, near mile marker 203. One of them said a driver had been found in his truck there that morning. Door locked, engine off, no sign of a struggle. But the man inside had been dead for hours. Heart failure, they said. That was the official explanation. But what caught my attention was the other part of the story. A highway patrol officer had reviewed the traffic cameras from that stretch of interstate during the night. And for almost 3 hours, the cameras showed a white semi-truck parked beside the dead driver's rig. No trailer, no company markings. Just sitting there, next to the cab. Not moving, not leaving, until shortly before sunrise. Then it had simply driven away. No one ever identified the driver. No one ever found the truck again. At least, that's what they said. Because later that same afternoon, I was back on the highway heading west. Daylight this time. Traffic everywhere. Cars. Trucks. Normal road noise filling the air. I was cruising along when I checked my side mirror. And far behind me, several lanes back, I saw a white semi-truck. Plain cab. No trailer, no logos, keeping exactly the same distance behind my trailer. Just close enough that I could see it, but far enough that I couldn't see who was driving it, or if anyone was driving it at all. The load looked ordinary at first, just another trailer waiting in a quiet loading yard before sunrise. I arrived at the warehouse outside St. Louis a little after 2 in the morning. The dispatch message had come through late the night before. Easy run. Pick up sealed trailer. Deliver straight through to Colorado. Nothing unusual. Drivers get loads like that all the time. The warehouse lot was almost empty when I pulled in. A single floodlight buzzed overhead, lighting up rows of parked trailers lined along the fence. Most of them had company logos. This one didn't. It was just a plain white box trailer sitting alone near the loading dock. No markings, no numbers. Just a small clipboard hanging beside the dock door with my name printed on the pickup sheet. I climbed down from the cab and walked over to it. The paperwork was thin, 2 pages. Origin, destination, weight. That was the first thing that caught my attention. The listed weight was surprisingly light. Just under 12,000 pounds. For a full trailer, that was almost nothing. Usually loads that light or packaged freight, electronics, retail goods, something like that. But when I opened the trailer doors to check the interior before hooking up, I didn't see any boxes. The inside looked darker than I expected. Just rows of wooden pallets stacked tightly from the floor almost to the ceiling. No shrink wrap. No containers. Just pallets. It was strange, but not impossible. Some warehouses move empty pallets between distribution centers. Still, the amount seemed excessive. I counted quickly. There had to be a few hundred in there, stacked in long rows that disappeared into the dim interior of the trailer. The wood smelled old, dry, like something that had been stored in a warehouse for years. I stepped back outside and looked again at the paperwork, still listed as light freight. Maybe the pallets themselves were the shipment. That wouldn't be the weirdest thing I had hauled. As I was about to close the doors, someone called out from behind me, "Driver." I turned. A man in a dark warehouse jacket was walking toward me from the office building. He looked tired, like someone who had been working overnight shifts for too long. "You the one taking the Colorado load?" he asked. "Yeah." He nodded toward the trailer. "You checked the seal?" I looked down. The doors had a small metal security seal threaded through the latch, bright silver, still intact. "Looks fine," I said. The man stepped closer and looked at it himself. Then he did something strange. He grabbed the seal and pulled on it twice, hard, like he wanted to make sure it wouldn't break. Only after that did he step back. "Good," he said quietly. Then he added something that stuck with me. "Once you leave here, don't open it." I shrugged. "That's normal for sealed freight." He shook his head slightly. "No, I mean it." His voice had changed. Lower. More serious. "Do not open the trailer before delivery." I studied him for a second. "Something fragile in there?" He hesitated. Then he simply said, "Just don't open it." For a moment we both stood there under the buzzing light. The yard was completely silent except for the distant hum of the interstate somewhere beyond the trees. Finally, he handed me the final paperwork. "You're good to go." I nodded and climbed back into my truck. The engine rumbled to life. I pulled forward, backed into the trailer, and locked the fifth wheel into place. The trailer shifted slightly as the weight settled onto the tractor. That was when I noticed something else. The trailer felt heavier than it should have. Not by a huge amount, just enough that I could feel it in the suspension. I checked the paperwork again. Still listed under 12,000 pounds. Maybe the pallets were older hardwood. Maybe the weight estimate was just wrong. It wouldn't be the first time shipping paperwork had been inaccurate. So I pulled out of the warehouse lot and headed toward the interstate. The highway was quiet at that hour, long stretches of dark road. Occasional headlights drifting past in the opposite direction. For the first hour, the drive was completely normal. The truck settled into its rhythm, engine humming steadily, trailer rolling smoothly behind me. Eventually, I reached the Missouri state line rest area and decided to stop for fuel and coffee before pushing through the night. I pulled into the truck stop and parked near the diesel pumps. When I climbed down from the cab, the night air felt cool and still. The lot lights hummed overhead. Somewhere across the parking area, another truck engine idled. I walked toward the store to grab coffee, but halfway there, I stopped because I heard something. A sound coming from behind me, from the trailer. A soft noise, barely loud enough to notice, like wood shifting slowly against wood. Then, silence again. I stood there listening. Nothing else moved. The wind was calm. The parking lot was quiet. For a moment, I told myself it was just the pallets settling after the drive. Wood moves sometimes when a trailer stops suddenly. That was a normal thing. Still, as I walked inside the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound hadn't come from shifting cargo. It had sounded more like something had moved. Inside the trailer, the coffee inside the truck stop was terrible. Thin, bitter, the kind that sits in a metal pot for hours. But it was hot, and at that hour, that was all that mattered. I stood near the counter for a minute, staring through the glass windows toward the parking lot. My truck was parked under one of the yellow lights near the diesel pumps. The trailer sat quietly behind it. Nothing moving, nothing unusual. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I had imagined the sound. Wood pallets settle all the time during a drive, especially when they're stacked that tightly. Still, when I stepped back outside a few minutes later, I found myself listening again. The night air was completely still, no wind, just the faint hum of truck engines scattered across the lot. I walked slowly toward my rig, each step echoing faintly on the pavement. When I reached the side of the trailer, I stopped. The metal walls of a trailer can carry sound in strange ways. Sometimes you can hear cargo shifting from outside if you stand close enough. I placed my hand against the cold aluminum surface. For nothing. Just silence. Then it happened again. A soft sound from inside the trailer. Not loud, but clear enough this time that I couldn't mistake it. Something sliding slowly against wood, followed by a dull knock. My hand froze against the metal. I leaned closer, pressing my ear gently against the trailer door. For several seconds there was nothing. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere across the truck stop, an air brake hissed as another driver shut down his engine. Then, knock. I held my breath. Another pause. Knock. The sound came from deeper inside the trailer, not near the doors. Somewhere farther forward. Then a third one. Knock. 3 knocks. Slow. Evenly spaced. My chest tightened. That was not the sound of pallets shifting. Wood scraping would drag, slide, creak. This was different, deliberate. I stepped back from the trailer. For a moment I considered opening the doors right there, just to check. But my eyes went to the metal seal on the latch, still intact. The warehouse worker's voice came back to me. Do not open the trailer before delivery. I stared at the seal for a long moment. If I broke it, the company would know immediately. Those seals are logged when loads leave warehouses. Dispatch checks them again at delivery. Breaking it without authorization could get a driver written up, maybe worse. I exhaled slowly and rubbed the back of my neck. There had to be another explanation. Maybe one of the pallet stacks had shifted during the drive and was leaning slightly. Maybe a loose board was knocking against another pallet when the trailer cooled down. Temperature changes can make wood contract. That could cause noises. It wasn't impossible. Still, those 3 knocks kept repeating in my head. Slow. Even. Almost like someone tapping their fingers on a table. I forced myself to stop thinking about it, climbed back into the cab, started the engine. The diesel rumble filled the night air again as the truck shook gently beneath me. For a moment I sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening. Nothing came from the trailer now, just the low vibration of the engine through the frame. Finally, I pulled out of the truck stop and rolled back onto the interstate. The road stretched west, through the darkness. Miles of flat farmland under a black sky. The trailer followed smoothly behind me. No movement, no sounds. After a while, I almost forgot about the knocking. Almost. Until about an hour later, when it started again. The road had grown emptier as the night went on. By the time the second hour passed, the interstate felt almost deserted. Just a few distant headlights and long stretches of quiet highway disappearing into darkness. The trailer had been silent for most of that time. No knocks, no shifting, nothing. Eventually, my shoulders relaxed again, and the earlier unease started fading into the background. I convinced myself it had been nothing more than pallets settling. Wood expands. Wood contracts. Anyone who hauls freight long enough hears strange sounds inside trailers. That was normal. Then the noise came back. This time it happened while I was doing about 65 miles an hour. A dull thud echoed through the frame of the truck. Not loud enough to startle me, but strong enough that I felt it in the steering wheel. I glanced in the mirror instinctively. The trailer looked perfectly steady. No swaying. No movement. just the reflective tape gliding along behind me in the glow of the headlights. Then I heard it again. Knock. The sound came from farther forward this time, not near the back doors where I had listened earlier. Somewhere closer to the front wall of the trailer. I frowned and leaned slightly forward in my seat. The engine noise made it harder to hear while moving. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks again. Slow. Even. Exactly the same pattern. A chill crept up the back of my neck, because that pattern was too clean, too deliberate. Cargo shifting doesn't make the same rhythm twice. I watched the road ahead, trying to focus on driving. Another mile passed, then another. The truck rolled steadily through the dark farmland. I told myself the sound could still be something mechanical, maybe a loose pallet board tapping against another stack when the trailer flexed. Road vibrations can create repeating patterns sometimes. Still, the sound came again. But this time it wasn't where I expected. Knock. The sound came from behind me, closer to the back doors. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. That meant whatever was causing it had moved, or something inside the trailer had shifted positions. I checked the mirrors again. The trailer looked perfectly normal. No bulging walls, no strange movement. Just rows of reflective tape sliding past the darkness of the highway. Up ahead, a blue sign appeared on the side of the road. Rest area, 1 mile. I stared at it for a moment. Normally I would have driven straight past, but the knocking had started to bother me enough that I wanted to stop and listen again without the engine noise, just to be sure. The exit ramp appeared a minute later. I eased the truck down the ramp and rolled slowly into the rest area parking lot. The place was almost completely empty. One sedan parked near the restroom building, a pickup truck sleeping in a corner space, and plenty of open spots for trucks. I parked under a light and shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. For a few seconds, I sat there without moving, listening. Nothing. No knocks. No movement. Just the quiet hum of insects around the overhead lights. I opened the door and climbed down from the cab. The air was cool, still. I walked slowly toward the back of the trailer. My boots sounded louder than usual on the pavement. When I reached the doors, I paused. The metal seal was still there, unbroken, exactly the way I had left it. For a moment, I just stood there staring at it. Then I leaned forward and placed my ear against the door again. Silence. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe I had just worked myself up over nothing. Then, knock. The sound came from the very center of the trailer, directly behind the doors. Close enough now that I felt the vibration through the metal. I pulled my head back immediately. My heart started beating faster, and before I could stop myself, I heard something else. A slow scraping sound. Wood shifting. Sliding across the trailer floor. Moving. Close. I stood there with my hands still on the trailer door. The metal felt colder than it should have. Inside the trailer, the scraping sound continued for another second, then stopped. Silence returned to the parking lot. The rest area lights hummed overhead. A car passed somewhere out on the interstate, its tires whispering over the pavement. I didn't move. I kept my ear close to the door, waiting. Nothing. No more scraping. No more knocking. For a moment I thought it had stopped completely. Then I heard breathing. Not loud. Not the kind of breathing you hear from someone standing next to you. It was muffled, like air moving through a small space. Slow. Steady. Coming from inside the trailer. My stomach tightened. That was the moment the possibility finally formed in my head. Someone might actually be in there. It happens sometimes. People sneak into trailers trying to cross state lines. Runaways, smugglers, even desperate migrants. Most drivers hear stories about it eventually. If someone had climbed in before the trailer was sealed, they could have been trapped back there for hours. And if that was the case, leaving them inside would be worse than breaking a company rule. I looked down at the metal seal again. Still unbroken. still exactly the way the warehouse worker had checked it earlier. His voice echoed again in my mind. Do not open the trailer before delivery. I rubbed the back of my neck and looked around the rest area. The sedan near the building was dark. The pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot had its windows fogged from someone sleeping inside. No one else seemed to notice anything. I turned back to the trailer doors. If there really was someone trapped inside, they might not last the rest of the drive. The thought made the decision for me. I climbed back into the cab and grabbed the bolt cutters from behind the seat. Every trucker carries tools like that, for chains, for damaged locks, for emergencies. When I stepped down again, the parking lot seemed even quieter than before. I walked back to the doors. The metal seal hung there in the latch, thin, silver, official. I hesitated for one last second. Then I positioned the cutters around the seal and squeezed. The metal snapped with a sharp crack. The sound echoed across the empty lot. For a moment I just stood there, holding the broken seal in my hand. Nothing moved inside the trailer. No knocking, no breathing, no sound. I dropped the broken piece of metal onto the pavement. Then I lifted the latch and pulled open the right door. The hinges creaked softly. Cold air drifted out from the dark interior. The rows of wooden pallets were exactly the way I had seen them earlier, stacked tightly from floor to ceiling. No boxes, no crates, no containers, just wood. I grabbed the flashlight from my belt and shined it inside. The beam moved slowly across the stacks, pallet after pallet. The light reached halfway into the trailer. Still nothing. No person, no movement. I stepped closer, shining the light deeper. The pallets filled almost the entire space, but something about them looked different now. Not the stacks themselves, the surfaces. Every pallet had a shallow, circular depression in the center, a smooth, worn mark in the wood, like something heavy had rested there, something round. The marks were identical. One on each pallet, hundreds of them, perfectly centered. I frowned and stepped 1 foot into the trailer. The wood creaked slightly under my weight. The flashlight beam swept deeper down the rows, and that was when I realized something. The first 3 pallets closest to the doors didn't have those marks. Their centers were clean, smooth, untouched, as if whatever had been sitting there was no longer there. I slowly turned the flashlight toward the floor behind me, and for the first time, I noticed the faint trail of scuff marks leading from the center of the trailer to the open doors. I followed the scuff marks with the flashlight. They started deep inside the trailer, somewhere beyond the stacked rows of pallets. Then they continued forward along the wooden floor, straight toward the open doors. Toward me, the marks were faint, just thin streaks in the dust that had collected along the trailer floor. But they were clear enough to see. Something had dragged itself forward, or been dragged. I stepped back instinctively. The beam of the flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. The scuff marks ended right at the edge of the trailer, at the metal lip where the cargo floor met the outside pavement. I slowly aimed the light downward. The ground beneath the trailer was empty. Nothing there. Just cracked asphalt and a small puddle reflecting the yellow parking lot lights. I waited, listening. The rest area was silent again. No breathing, no movement, no sound from the trailer. Finally, I stepped back and pulled the doors shut. The hinges clanged louder this time, too loud in the quiet night. I latched the doors again, even though the seal was gone. Then I stood there staring at the back of the trailer for a long moment. Something had definitely been inside, but whatever it wasn't there anymore. And the scuff marks showed only one direction, out. I climbed back into the cab and sat there for a minute, trying to decide what to do. Calling the company would mean explaining why I broke the seal, and explaining what I had seen, which didn't make much sense even to me. In the end, I decided to keep driving. If something had really been inside the trailer, it had already left. And there was no point sitting in a dark rest area thinking about it all night. So I started the engine and rolled back onto the interstate. The trailer followed behind me again. Silent. For the rest of the drive, nothing unusual happened. No more knocks. No shifting wood. No strange sounds. Just the long stretch of highway and the steady hum of the tires. By morning, I reached the distribution center outside Denver. The warehouse manager met me at the dock. He checked the paperwork. Then he looked at the trailer latch. "Seal's broken," he said. I told him I had heard movement inside and had to check the cargo. He didn't seem surprised, just slightly annoyed. He called someone on the radio. A few minutes later, 2 men in protective vests came out from the warehouse. They opened the trailer doors and stepped inside with flashlights. For a long time, they didn't say anything, just moved slowly down the rows of pallets, examining the wood. Finally, one of them turned toward me. "What time did you open the trailer?" I told him. He nodded once. Then he said something quietly to the other man. The second man looked back toward the center of the trailer. Then he asked me another question. "Did you see anything leave?" I hesitated. Then I told him about the scuff marks, about the trail leading out of the trailer. The 2 men looked at each other again. Neither of them seemed surprised. Finally, the first man stepped out of the trailer and closed the doors. "That explains it," he said. "Explains what?" I asked. But he didn't answer. Instead, he handed my paperwork back and told me I was free to go. 2 days later, the email arrived from the company. Temporary suspension. Reason: tampering with secured freight. Attached to the email was a video file. Footage from a highway security camera overlooking the rest area where I had stopped that night. I opened the video. The timestamp showed the moment I had parked. My truck sat under the lights. The trailer doors still sealed. I watched myself climb down and walk toward the building. Then the camera view stayed fixed on the truck. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the trailer doors moved, not opening wide, just enough for a narrow gap. From that gap, something slipped out, low to the ground. Too dark to make out clearly on the grainy footage, but it moved fast, dropping from the trailer floor onto the pavement, then disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. The video ended. For a long time, I just stared at the screen, because the timestamp on the video showed something impossible. The doors had opened almost 20 minutes before I cut the seal, and the camera showed something else, too. When the trailer door opened, the metal seal was still intact. Heavier trucks always make the desert highways feel smaller at night. When you're hauling 40,000 pounds behind you, every mile of empty road starts to feel like a tunnel, just asphalt, headlights, darkness on both sides. I've been driving long haul for almost 11 years now, mostly southwest routes, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, sometimes California if dispatch feels generous. After a while, you develop habits. Every driver does. Same gas stations, same truck stops, same rest areas where you know you can sleep without someone knocking on your door at 2 a.m. asking if you're leaving soon. For me, one of those places was a small rest area off Interstate 40 in northern Arizona. Black Mesa Rest Area. Nothing special about it, just a small parking lot carved out of desert rock. A low concrete building with bathrooms. A couple of vending machines that only worked half the time. But truckers liked it because it was quiet. Cell service barely worked. No city lights for miles, just wind moving across the desert and the occasional semi passing on the highway. And there was one specific parking spot I always used. Drivers called it the quiet slot. It sat at the far edge of the truck parking area, right beneath a tall sodium lamp that flickered sometimes when the wind picked up. Most drivers didn't bother pulling all the way out there. Too far from the bathrooms. Too far from the building. But that was exactly why I liked it. No engines idling next to you all night. No refrigerated trailers humming 10 feet from your bunk. Just empty space and the sound of the desert. I had probably parked there 20 or 30 times over the past few years. It almost felt like my spot. That night I had been driving since Albuquerque. Dispatch wanted the load in Reno by the next afternoon, but my clock was running low. I needed a break before crossing into Nevada. Black Mesa was the obvious stop. It was close to midnight when I rolled off the interstate ramp. The rest area looked almost empty. 2 trucks parked near the entrance, another one idling closer to the bathroom building. Headlights swept across the asphalt as I turned toward the far end of the lot, toward the quiet slot. For a second I thought the place was empty like usual. Then my headlights caught something sitting beneath the lamp. A truck, not a full rig, just a cab, no trailer attached. The vehicle was parked exactly where I usually stopped. I slowed down as I rolled closer. It was an older semi-cab, dark gray, maybe a Freightliner from the early 2000s. Hard to tell in the weak yellow light from the pole above it. No company logo. No reflective stripes. Just plain gray metal. Something about the way it sat there made the scene feel off. Most truckers park straight. Years of backing trailers into docks trains you to line things up perfectly. But this one was slightly crooked, like whoever parked it had pulled in without really caring where the wheels ended up. I eased my truck past it slowly. The cab windows were dark. No interior lights. No glow from a dashboard. Nothing. I looked for movement through the windshield. A silhouette. A driver leaning back in the seat. Anything. But the cab looked empty. That was strange, but not impossible. Some drivers shut everything off when they sleep. Still, something about the truck bothered me. The engine hood looked dusty, like it had been sitting in the desert wind for a while. And the tires, they didn't look warm. Most trucks that have just parked still give off a faint heat shimmer under the lights. This one didn't. I pulled into another space about 40 feet away, not my usual spot, but close enough to keep the truck in view. I set the brakes and killed the engine. The sudden silence filled the cab. No diesel rumble, no road noise, just the ticking sound of my engine cooling. For a minute I sat there looking out through the windshield. The gray truck hadn't moved. No door opening, no cabin light, no driver climbing out. Nothing. The yellow lamp above it flickered once. For just a second the light dimmed, then came back. And in that momentary flicker, I could have sworn the truck looked slightly different. Like it had shifted, not driven forward, not rolled, just changed position slightly. I blinked and leaned closer to the glass. But now it looked exactly the same as before. Same crooked angle. Same dark windows. Same empty cab. I told myself I was just tired. 10 hours on the road will mess with your eyes. So I pulled the curtain across the windshield, climbed into the bunk, and lay down. Outside, the desert wind moved slowly across the asphalt, and somewhere out in the parking lot, metal creaked quietly, like the door of a truck cab opening, very slowly. The sound was faint, just a soft metallic click somewhere outside in the parking lot. When you spend enough nights sleeping in a truck, you learn to ignore most noises. Engines starting, doors slamming, air brakes releasing. But this one felt different. It had that slow, deliberate sound, like someone opening something carefully. I stayed still in the bunk for a moment, listening. The desert wind brushed against the side of the cab. Then everything went quiet again. No footsteps. No engine starting. Nothing. I reached forward and slid the curtain open just enough to look out through the windshield. The parking lot looked the same as before. The yellow lamp still flickered over the far corner. And the gray truck was still sitting there, crooked. Exactly where it had been. For a few seconds I just stared at it, waiting to see if a door would open. Maybe the driver had stepped out to stretch his legs. Maybe he was walking toward the bathrooms. But I didn't see anyone. Then something moved. At first I thought it was just a shadow shifting under the lamp, but the shape slowly separated from the darkness beside the gray truck. A man. He stepped into the light. He looked like any other truck driver you'd see at a rest area at 3 in the morning. Heavy jacket, baseball cap, one hand rubbing his face like he'd just woken up. He wasn't coming from the gray truck. He was walking from the opposite direction, from one of the trucks parked closer to the building. The man moved slowly across the lot, not toward the bathrooms, not toward the vending machines. He was walking straight toward the gray truck. Something about the way he moved felt strange. Not drunk, not sleepy, just distant, like someone walking in their sleep. I leaned forward in my seat a little more. The man reached the passenger side of the gray cab. He stopped there. For a moment, he just stood still. Then he reached for the door handle, but before his hand touched it, the door opened, slowly, from the inside. The man didn't hesitate. He didn't look surprised. He climbed up the steps like he had been invited. One foot, then the other. A second later, the door shut behind him. The entire thing happened in complete silence. No voices, no interior light, nothing. I waited, watching the truck, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe the driver had been inside the whole time. Maybe he had simply opened the door from the inside. But something about it still bothered me, because the door had started moving before the man touched it, and the man had never looked inside the cab. He had just climbed in. Like he already knew someone was there. I stayed there watching for several minutes. The gray truck didn't start. No headlights came on. No interior lights either. Just a silent truck sitting beneath the flickering lamp. Eventually, I leaned back in the seat and pulled the curtain closed again. I told myself it wasn't my business. Truckers pick each other up sometimes. Drivers ride along to the next town. Maybe the guy needed a lift. Maybe they knew each other. Out here on the road, things like that happen all the time. Still, something kept bothering me, because before that man walked across the lot, I had been staring at the gray truck for nearly a minute, and I was almost certain about one thing. When I first looked at it, the passenger door had been closed, and there hadn't been anyone inside. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Drivers pick each other up all the time. Someone's truck breaks down. Someone misses a ride. Someone needs to get to the next town. It happens. Still, the way that door opened bothered me. I lay back down in the bunk and pulled the blanket over my shoulder. The cab was quiet again. Outside, the desert wind scraped dust across the parking lot. For a while, I just stared at the ceiling of the sleeper, listening to the faint creak of the truck frame cooling down. Eventually, I drifted off. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. What woke me up was the sound of air brakes releasing. A long, heavy hiss. Every truck driver knows that sound. You hear it thousands of times. It means a truck just started up, or a driver just released the parking brake. I opened my eyes and checked the small clock on the dash. 3:12 a.m. Still hours before sunrise. I slid the curtain aside again and looked out through the windshield. The gray truck was still there, but now the cab looked slightly different. The interior was faintly lit, not bright, just the dim glow of dashboard lights, like someone had turned the key halfway. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see through the windshield of the gray cab. From this angle, I could see the steering wheel, the driver's seat, and the passenger seat. Neither of them had anyone in them. The seats were empty, completely empty, but the engine was running. I could tell from the faint vibration in the air. A truck idling makes a certain rhythm you can feel even from a distance. The gray cab was idling slowly beneath the yellow lamp, and yet there was no one sitting behind the wheel. For several seconds, I just stared at it, my brain trying to explain what I was seeing. Maybe the driver had climbed into the sleeper. Maybe he had leaned back out of view. But the seats were clearly visible. No movement. No shadow shifting across the glass. Nothing. Then something inside the cab moved. The steering wheel turned. Just a few inches. Left. Then slowly back to center. My chest tightened. No hands were on it. No driver in the seat, but the wheel had definitely moved. I watched the gray truck for another full minute. The engine kept idling. The dashboard lights stayed on. The cab remained empty. Finally, I saw the headlights flicker once. Then the truck rolled forward, slowly, almost gently, like someone easing off the brake pedal. It crept out of the parking spot and began moving toward the exit road, still with no headlights, no brake lights, just a dark truck gliding through the dim yellow glow of the rest area lamp. I sat frozen in my seat as it passed through the edge of the light and disappeared into the darkness beyond the parking lot. For a long time after that, I stayed awake, watching the empty corner where it had been parked, listening to the desert wind, trying not to think about the man who had climbed into that truck, and the fact that when it drove away, there had been no one in the driver's seat. I didn't sleep again after that. When something strange happens on the road, most drivers try to ignore it. Long nights and empty highways can play tricks on your head. Everyone knows that. But what I had seen didn't feel like a trick. A man had climbed into that gray truck, and when it drove away, the cab had been empty. For the next hour, I just sat in the driver's seat, staring through the windshield. The rest area was completely still. One truck near the bathroom started its engine around 4. Another driver climbed down from his cab to stretch his legs. Normal things. Normal sounds. No gray truck. Eventually, the sky began to lighten along the horizon, that pale blue color that shows up before sunrise in the desert. My clock said 5:37 a.m. My driving clock still had a few hours left, and Reno was a long way off. So I decided to leave. I started the engine and let the truck idle for a minute. Then I rolled slowly across the parking lot. As I passed the corner where the gray truck had been parked, I glanced over at the empty spot. The lamp above it was still flickering. The asphalt underneath looked dusty, like the rest of the lot. But something caught my attention. There were tire marks there. 2 dark lines where the truck had pulled forward during the night. That part made sense. What didn't make sense were the other marks. Footprints. They started near the passenger side of where the gray truck had been parked. Just one set. Boot prints in the thin layer of dust. They led toward the driver door. Then they stopped. There were no prints walking away. No prints returning to the other trucks. Just one short trail, ending at the door of the gray cab. I slowed my truck as I rolled past the spot, trying to study the ground through my side window. That's when I noticed something else. The footprints were not facing the truck. They were pointing away from it, like whoever made them had stepped down from the cab and taken only 2 steps before disappearing. I didn't stay to think about it. I pulled out of the rest area and merged back onto Interstate 40. The highway stretched west through the desert. Morning light slowly filled the sky, and eventually the strange feeling from the night began to fade. By late morning, I reached a truck stop outside Flagstaff to grab coffee and fuel. It was busy. Dozens of rigs parked across the lot. I shut down the engine and climbed out. Inside the diner, a couple of drivers were talking near the counter. One of them was shaking his head. "Third one this year," he said. "Same stretch of road." The waitress looked confused. "What do you mean, third one?" The driver pointed out toward the highway. "Another driver went missing last night." Something in my chest tightened. I sat down at the counter and pretended to read the menu while they kept talking. The driver continued. "Truck was still sitting at the rest area this morning. Engine cold, doors locked. Guy just gone." Another driver spoke up from the booth behind them. "Black Mesa?" The first man nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's the one." I stopped breathing for a second, because that was the exact rest area I had just left. The waitress asked the question everyone was thinking. "So what happened to him?" The driver shrugged. "No one knows." He stirred his coffee and stared out the window. Just another trucker who disappeared in the middle of the night. The diner fell quiet after that. Truckers don't talk much when a driver goes missing. Most of us know how easily it could happen. Long roads, empty places, nobody watching. Someone disappears, and the highway just keeps moving. The two drivers at the counter eventually finished their coffee and left. Engine started outside. Tires rolled back onto the interstate. Normal morning again. But I couldn't stop thinking about the gray truck and the man who climbed into it. After breakfast, I walked back across the parking lot to my rig. The sun was already high enough to warm the metal hood. Heat shimmer rose from the asphalt. For a moment, I just stood there beside the door. Something felt wrong. At first, I thought I was just tired, but then I noticed the mark. A thin streak across the dust on my driver's side door, like someone had dragged a finger along the paint. It started near the handle and ran downward in a crooked line. I frowned and rubbed the dust away with my thumb. Probably nothing. Truck stops are dirty places. Wind throws sand everywhere. Still, I didn't remember that mark being there before. I climbed into the cab and shut the door. The inside of the truck smelled like coffee and old road dust. Everything looked normal. Nothing missing. Nothing moved. I started the engine and pulled back onto the interstate heading west. The rest of the day passed quietly. Miles of desert, gas stations, long straight highways disappearing into heat waves. By late afternoon, I was crossing into Nevada. Dispatch sent me a message about a delivery window in Reno. Normal work again. The strange feeling from the night slowly faded into the background. Until that evening. I had stopped at another rest area outside Tonopah. This one was bigger than Black Mesa. More trucks. More light. Nothing about it felt strange. I parked, killed the engine, and climbed down to stretch my legs. The sky was already turning dark. The desert cooled quickly once the sun disappeared. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cab and leaned against the side of my truck. Other drivers were walking around the lot. Someone laughed near the vending machines. Another truck started up across the parking area. Normal sounds. Normal place. Then something caught my eye. At the far end of the parking lot, under a tall yellow lamp, there was a truck parked by itself. Just a cab. No trailer. Gray paint. No company logo. No reflective stripes. My stomach tightened immediately. The truck looked exactly like the one from Black Mesa. Same dull gray metal. Same slightly crooked angle in the parking space. Same dark windows. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself it was a different truck. Gray semis aren't rare. Plenty of old cabs look the same, but something about it felt too familiar. Then I noticed something else. The truck wasn't parked randomly. It was sitting in the corner of the lot, beneath the only lamp at that end, exactly like the quiet slot at Black Mesa. I looked around the lot. Drivers were coming and going. Nobody seemed to notice the gray truck. No one walking toward it. No one climbing inside. Just sitting there, waiting. I finished my water and climbed back into my cab. But I didn't close the curtain this time. I kept watching the far corner of the parking lot. The gray truck didn't move. The lamp above it flickered once, then steadied again. Minutes passed. Engine started and stopped around the lot. Eventually, the parking area grew quieter. One by one, the other trucks shut down for the night. The gray truck remained, still, silent. Then, something changed. The interior of the cab lit up for a moment. Just a dim glow from the dashboard, like someone had turned the key. I leaned forward in my seat, trying to see through the windshield from across the lot. And that's when I noticed the movement. The driver door opened slowly, from the inside. No one had approached the truck. No footsteps across the asphalt. No shadow moving toward it. But the door opened anyway. And for just a second, I could see a figure sitting in the driver's seat. A trucker, wearing a dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't move, didn't look around, just sat there behind the wheel. And even from across the parking lot, I had the strange feeling that the man in that seat was not the same driver who had climbed into the truck the night before. I didn't leave the cab that night. Not again. Something about that gray truck sitting under the lamp made the entire rest area feel wrong, like the air itself had changed. So I stayed in the driver's seat, watching through the windshield. The gray truck's door slowly closed again. The interior light faded. Then everything went dark inside the cab. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then the engine started. A deep diesel rumble rolled across the lot. I felt the vibration through the steering wheel of my own truck. The gray cab sat there idling beneath the lamp, still with no headlights on, still with no brake lights. And then it began to move, slowly. The truck rolled forward out of the parking space and turned toward the exit road. It drove past several parked rigs, right through the middle of the lot. As it passed beneath the brighter lights near the entrance, I could see through the windshield clearly. There was someone sitting behind the wheel, but something about him looked wrong. He was sitting too still, hands resting on the wheel, head facing straight ahead, not turning to check mirrors, not adjusting anything, just staring forward, like a mannequin propped in the seat. The truck rolled past the exit sign and disappeared down the dark road leading back to the highway. A few seconds later, I heard it accelerate somewhere out in the distance. Then the sound faded. I stayed awake for a long time after that, long enough for the rest area to fall completely silent again. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. At some point near sunrise, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the sky outside was pale blue. Morning light filled the parking lot. Drivers were already starting their engines. I rubbed my eyes and sat up. For a moment, I forgot about the gray truck, until I looked out the windshield. The parking space where it had been parked was empty, just like the night before. But this time, something else caught my attention. Across the lot, a man was standing near the vending machines talking to a state trooper. Two other drivers stood nearby, listening. I climbed down from my cab and walked toward them. The officer was writing something in a small notebook. One of the drivers shook his head slowly. "I saw his truck this morning," the man said. "Still parked over there by the bathrooms." The trooper nodded. "Keys still inside," he replied. "Phone too." The other driver asked the question everyone was thinking. "So where the hell did he go?" The trooper didn't answer right away. He looked out across the parking lot, toward the dark desert beyond the highway. Then he said quietly, "That's the third driver missing this year." My stomach tightened. "From here?" someone asked. The trooper nodded again. "Black Mesa Rest Area." The words hit me harder than I expected, because that was exactly where I had been the night before. The other drivers started murmuring to each other. One of them spoke up. "Always the same thing," he said. "Truck still there, driver gone." The trooper closed his notebook. Last security camera we checked showed him walking across the lot around 3 in the morning. Looked like he was heading toward another truck. "What kind of truck?" one of the drivers asked. The officer shrugged slightly. Camera quality was bad. All we could really see was the color. He paused for a second, then finished the sentence. "Gray." After that night, I started paying attention to the trucks parked around me, especially the ones that don't have a trailer, and especially the gray ones. Because once you start noticing them, you realize something strange. The same trucks show up again. Different highway, different rest area, different night, but the same truck. And sometimes, there's someone sitting inside who wasn't there before. If you've ever had something strange happen on the road, feel free to share it in the comments. I read a lot of them. And some of the stories people send in are even worse than these. The next video might be one of those.